Hello, everybody. I'm so glad you can join me today for this Facebook Live. I have, and I know you've been waiting for it, yes, Kim Brophey. For those of you who are coming to the Dog Behavior Conference, you are in for a treat. For those of you who haven't registered yet, you must register. Come because you are going to learn so many incredible things. It is April the 1st to the 3rd. It is the Dog Behavior Conference. It is a virtual conference. Doesn't matter where in the world you are, you can join. And don't worry, you don't have to be live for all 3 days. You can dip in, you can dip out, but you could also have access from when those presentations go live. You have access to those presentations for 12 months afterwards. So get registering. But I'm so glad that you can join us because I have the wonderful Kim Brophey, and I got to get her title right. So I'm going to look at my notes because I don't want to get her titles wrong. Kim is an applied ethologist. She is a dog behavior consultant with the IAABC, a certified dog behavior consultant, and also a family dog mediator. You have the Dog Door Behavior Center in Asheville, North Carolina. Kim, welcome.
Thank you so much for inviting me to do this, and I'm so excited about speaking at the conference.
Yes, you're talking about what shouldn't be controversial, but I still think in some circles it isn't, but it shouldn't be. Your title is Trapped: The Effects of Captivity on the Modern Pet Dog. And when people hear that, they're going to be going, what is she talking about? My dog has the best life. I've got like 10 different beds around my home. My dogs can go wherever they want. They've got a whole beautiful back garden out there, backyard to walk in. What are you talking about, Kim Brophey? Trapped?
Yeah.
Explain.
Yeah, it is. I think it's one of the reasons, exactly what you say, kind of our first reflexive thought about that. We think about like dogs have it made, right, in our pet homes and environments. So as a result, we haven't really studied their welfare like we would other animals in captivity, any other wild animal that's, say, kept in a zoo, or domesticated species that are kept in confining kind of agricultural conditions as opposed to a free range, set of conditions. And so we don't think about our dogs living as pets in our lives as being trapped. We think this is exactly where they want to be. And in many ways, that's true. So there is an inherent contradiction here, which I'll try to explain without getting terribly lost down a rabbit hole. Yes, people will make this point that dogs' place evolutionarily, naturally, as a species is at the side of people. And that's very much true. They became a dog because of the opportunities that humans presented to them, scavenging our leftovers. We created this wonderful mutually beneficial relationship going back 10 to 40,000 years, where we benefited from their skills and aptitude and vice versa. And so they were able to make a living as a species off of their relationship with us, and therefore became dogs and diverged from their natural canine ancestors. But what we know of as kind of pet conditions, very few of us are in the industry particularly are old enough to remember what life was like before the pet reality as we know it. So you were mentioning before we started recording your grandmother's dog behind you there. And I love to tell a story of my own grandmother's dog, as well as my, childhood growing up in Atlanta, where the dogs were loose and my grandmother's dog was loose. And there was an understanding and acceptance of their behaviors, their needs as an animal. I think we're a little bit more realistic, maybe one would argue less responsible in terms of keeping dogs on leashes and in fences and whatnot. But this is still the way most dogs in the world are living in other countries that are not as developed, say, as the United States, where dogs are still living the life that they had lived for 10 to 40,000 years, where they're free to express their natural behaviors autonomously, engaging with the people in those environments, and yes, having relationships with them, but also still having the choice to walk away from that location and go do something else, and go scavenge, go have other social relationships with other animals, follow their instincts as they arise for them. And so I think that the gap in our understanding and appreciating the predicament for dogs being almost entirely captive as the kind of standard life that most pet dogs have these days, is because we fail to appreciate one single point about evolution and nature, a fundamental law, which is the environmental conditions create the organism to be the way that it is, to be a perfectly fit key to that lock. So that whole concept of a niche and a habitat for every organism, every species, is critical and essential. And there's no breaking the relationship between those two things. So the signals, the events, the stimuli in the environment are going to be things that that particular animal has an inborn knowledge of when they're born and at the appropriate points in their development, and have instinctual responses already pre-wired, knowing how to operate effectively in that environment as they continue to learn and then pass that on to the next generation. When we as humans artificially selected dogs for all these particular specializations, herding, hunting, varmint control, tracking, what have you, we like hyper specialize those niches to make them perfectly fit specialized keys to perfectly fit locks. And now very few dogs are being used for what they were originally developed for. And so essentially we have the kind of fish out of water predicament, or the square peg in a round hole predicament, that has been so well studied in wild animals in zoos, or again in domestic animals and farms. So Temple Grandin's done a lot to expose things like that and talk about, you know, meeting the behavioral needs of any animal that's under human control, whether that be in a zoo or a farm, or as a companion animal. And yet we've had so little focus on the predicament of dogs, because as you say, we all have this reflexive, superficial thought of, well, they have all their basic needs met. They want for nothing, except they still struggle to have good welfare because of that dissonance between the environment and their instincts and their very nature. And so a lot of them are chronically frustrated, chronically disoriented, chronically over aroused and yet under engaged, as they find that their place in the world doesn't really exist in most cases. And so we're at the beginning in this industry of just starting to have this conversation and be honest enough with ourselves and each other to ask the tough questions about what this is going to mean going forward for our relationship with dogs.
Now, for those people whose minds or heads are just exploding and going, my God, I never saw it like that, but it makes complete sense. What the hell do I do now? What do they do?
Right, right. Well, so, you know, I think there are these kind of short game questions and answers and long game questions and answers, which, you know, as a community and as a culture, we're again just starting to have. So the first thing is, it's just us as a family member and a steward and a carer for our dogs, looking at the dog in front of us and working to meet them where they are and to understand them for their own experience, and to appreciate the things that are completely outside of their control that actually our ancestors may have painstakingly developed and bred into them, which now we beat our head against a wall about, or we try to correct or modify these behaviors, which are actually kind of by definition not going to be very sensitive and responsive to behavior modification, which just sets all of us up for frustration and resentment. So I think learning about the whole of the dog in front of you, which is why, you know, I've developed the legs model, which we'll be talking about in the presentation at the conference, you know, so not just the mantra of the learning piece, the it's all how you raise them piece that we've been conditioned to think about, but also really looking at their environment and their genetics to see how those two things are working together or not, how they might be actually the source of a lot of the behavior problems that we're observing, more as symptoms than as pathologies, you know, and then really looking at the dog as an individual organism, a personality that is evolving and developing during the course of their own life and dealing with their health and their age and their sex and, you know, their reproductive status and whether they're diseased, injured, have an infection, you know, chronic arthritis, like all of these other things that are going on for them, rather than, as Andrew Hale, our friend, talks about so much, this judgment we have of this other, largely based on the societal narratives we have in our head of like what a good dog should do and that's a bad dog and we have to modify that behavior because we don't like it. Like we just have to really start coming to grips with the full scope and reality of the situation, and that that change in expectations and attitudes there is step number one for me, and then we have a lot of conversations to have as a culture about what does this mean about breeding and about standard practices, about, how we decide to bring a dog into our family or not. And it's going to be a bit of a tricky road because we've got some tough biases that we have to tackle.
I heard you in one of your, actually, I think it was a talk for TEDx. You talked about, and you just mentioned it briefly there about, well, here we have this little puppy, blank slate. Now we're going to raise it. Now we're going to just, put everything on and raise a really good dog. And you're saying, wait a second, not necessarily.
Right.
Well, what does that just do? That approach does a disservice to this little puppy that we have here, that thinking that we can make that a good dog.
Yeah. Isn't that odd, right? When we stop and think about it, that's so unscientific. Like no person would be that way. No other animal would be that way. And yet it's like we've psychologically stuck dog is in this black hole or vortex in between the reality of the natural world and human world, where we don't really think of them as being subject to all of the other principles and laws that would affect all the other species. So, wouldn't it be lovely if you could just go out and pick a handsome man and you could just mold him to be the exact husband that you'd like him to be? Or, in the case of a child, this child is born, I'm going to make it exactly the way that I would like it to be, and it's going to follow my every whim. Well, that's a fantasy, because each individual is bringing things to the table from the moment that they're born that are unique to them, that are genetically informed and are powerful. And then further, those things interact with their environment and their experiences and their learning as an individual. And that is molding who they are on quite the biological and subconscious level. And so to think we're so powerful, we're going to come in here with our magic dog training wand and just tap something and then transform the dog to meet all of our expectations. It's ridiculous. And yet it's a narrative that has been fostered by what we have to take responsibility for in the dog behavior industry, the dog training field. It's a marketing angle. Any dog, any age, any size, any breed, I can make them obey your every command and you'll have your dream puppy. And we have to start saying, what, that's baloney. That's really not something anyone should be saying. And frankly, if you succeed, you probably broke the dog. Meaning if you succeed in just a 180 through training alone, I would argue in most cases with it, we've done tremendous damage to that dog's welfare.
So those robotic dogs that I know and I have met in my life, dogs that I feel like are just going through the motions because they've been made to go through the motions, or they've been intimidated enough so that they go through the motions, both in the companion dog world and the working dog world. And it's quite stark, yet it's celebrated as a dog, how wonderfully behaved the dog is. It's not a problem. Look how well I've trained it. And there are, but when, even when I started many years ago, and, I still was sort of a pack theorist. I had learned under a mentor of mine who was a great trainer, I believed. And, but even when I came sort of through that, and, I still didn't believe in physically hitting a dog or harming a dog, but I trained it. And then I still use sound aversion. And then as I kind of delve deeper into things of I don't feel comfortable using sound aversion. I don't think it does. I don't think this is good for these dogs. So I moved away from that, but I'm still training, right? And I'm still teaching dogs to sit, stay, come when called. And I said this to Andrew Hale. It wasn't really until I started to read, it was Dr. Brian Hare and Dognition. And it was Adam McClosey, who really started to delve deep into the emotional lives of these animals. And of course, I knew animals had emotional life, absolutely, but that the light bulb went off. And so, and that was a shift for me. And then I started to think of, exactly as we were talking about Dilly back here, who was my grandmother's dog, who when I was a very young child, had a little nip at me because I didn't know what I was doing. I would go visit my grandmother, and this dog was a dog. I mean, my grandmother didn't train dogs; they just were. And she hunted. I don't believe in hunting. I don't like hunting, but she hunted with my grandmother, and she was a dog. And that's kind of what I grew up with. And so this sort of, how shall I put it, that I felt like by suppressing, I so talk about, the dominant trainers suppressing their dog's behavior, but positive trainers are also suppressing their dog's behavior.
I'm so glad
it sounds terrible to say that.
No, but it needs to be said. And, there's no judgment here, right? It's just a matter of us understanding the reality of the fact that modifying behavior is invasive.
Yes. Oh my God.
And we can condition others and be conditioned ourselves without anyone giving permission for that process. Like, I always use advertising as an example, right? Like, think of how easily we are conditioned by advertising against our will, and how it actually changes our experience of our life, ourselves, our self-perception, our perception of others, our expectations about the things that we deserve. Like, and all of that ends up driving behavior in ways that are not necessarily good for us, right? But yet they happen, and nobody's aversively marketing to us. It's just very effective classical conditioning, and then operant conditioning. Largely by understanding the dopamine system, honestly, and that's a whole rabbit hole we could go down with that. But that's kind of what we're engaging in through positive reinforcement. And I remember when I started to realize that positive reinforcement training could be detrimental, it was like my heart fell off a cliff, because I felt so committed to this movement, and I still am. Okay, like as a trainer, as a behavior consultant, the tools that I use are always going to be following that model of, Lima, of least invasive, minimally aversive. Like, that's my personal value choice. But I also recognize that we get drunk with our power in our knowledge and ability to modify behavior, because it's remarkable what we can do. And yet it's so tempting and so reinforcing for us to get the behavior change responses that we just keep doing it. It's like we go for that, we got rewarded, so we repeat the behavior. So our more kicks in. We want more behavior change, fancier footwork, faster comes and, straights. And it's like, I think we have to just be compassionately objective enough with ourselves and with each other about what that all is, and recognizing that no matter how kind our methods are, we can overtrain any brain to be behaving in a way that is not serving its own welfare, and where the animal is a result of the conditioning, but not living an autonomous existence. And again, with that compromised welfare. And, that's a massive can of worms. I realize that this is not about trying to break down the progress of the positive reinforcement movement, but it is a matter of saying that least invasive, minimally aversive goes a lot further than what tools we choose.
Yes, it does. Now, let's be devil's advocate. You got dog lovers out there that are listening to this, and dog trainers, and go, Kim, this is all great, but tomorrow I have a client that if I don't bring the goods and show a behavior change, they're going to go to the shock collar trainer down the road.
Oh yeah.
What do I do?
This has been actually, it's funny that you said that. In my full course, the online Legs Applied Orthology Family Dog Mediation course, I taught it at Wolf Park, but we recorded it live. So it's been kind of fun, because it's like everyone gets to feel like a fly on the wall. In the first, in a few minutes, literally, of the course, and in the introduction, I share that when I first gave myself permission to have this paradigm shift in how I work, because I own a behavior center. This is what I do for a living and have for 20 years. Okay. So none of this is like an abstraction where I'm academically separated from the reality, the implications of this. Like, I get it, that moment of, okay, what's the client's expectation? And I was really terrified when I made the full commitment to jump off this cliff. I was like, maybe the clients are just going to stop calling. We're going to get horrible reviews as we just lift the curtain and we are honest with our clients about it. And shockingly, the opposite happened. So it's almost like the dog, the family, and the pro are caught in a cycle that, well, and the onus being on us or the family, not the dog, where no one really knows how to break the cycle. And so we foster the idea they should have these expectations. So they have these expectations. And then if we don't say, you know, my industry sent you false messaging about not realistic expectations, if we don't say that at the very beginning, then they're going to just continue to think, well, that's what you do, right? That's your job. That's what you're supposed to do. And I, as an owner, as a steward, I'm failing my dog. If I can't make it do that, my neighbors will judge me, you know? So the ripples of the sense of like believing in this myth go far and wide. So what we would do is we would just, you know, of course, gently hear and still do all of their concerns and their goals, their questions, and we are going to find solutions to the problems that are creating quality of life and relationship issues for them and their dog. It's just that 9 times out of 10, we don't actually need to pick up that training piece to do it. It's about shifting expectations, management, practices, provisions, you know, compromising. And just what's so fascinating is the fact that like where you'd think, oh no, this is going to disappoint the families. And it's been so fun watching all of my now 700 students implement it and get the same reaction. So it wasn't just my clients. The clients are relieved. They're relieved. It's like, oh, you mean I don't have to make my dog do a perfect place at the front door when someone knocks and stay there? No, actually, we could use a baby gate, a bone, a pattern. You know, it's just like we're giving them easier ways to solve problems that take the pressure off. So that's been the great miraculous surprise, really. And the creativity that's coming out of all of these students worldwide is just blowing my mind. It really, because things I've never thought of, people are coming up with.
Yeah, and I think it's, you know, we're always encouraging dogs to be great problem solvers. Let's you know, let's use their amazing abilities to problem solve, and we're not really problem solving ourselves. And that's what you make is a really good point, because for so long I used to go to clients' homes, and certainly when I was a younger trainer, and I'd be there for 2 hours and I would give it large. I would be like, here's all the information and here's your homework and here's what you have to do. And I have a mother and 4 children. Yeah. And like, I'm the greatest dog trainer in the world, right? Because I just went in and gave this great information, and then I go back the next week and none of it's being done. And I'm like, well, you're a crap dog owner because you haven't done it. Right. And I'm still a great dog trainer. And then I became a mother myself. And then I went, oh shit. Wow. Got it. Got it. Yeah. Right. How are we going to be able to simplify, and give solutions and success for dogs and their people, and not have them have to do all of this, you know, you're going to teach your dog to go to mat when granny comes in, when there is a baby gate. But so it's so much easier to put the dog behind a baby gate. Oh my God, thank God, everybody's relieved. But the thing is that then I get pushback from trainers that go, and not that I really should be bothered about it, but, oh, well, Victoria, all you do is management. You don't teach dogs to do anything. Like, how do you, and it's not just management, but you're going to get judged, right? We make judgments about dog behavior. Other people are making judgments about our behavior. We make judgments about their behavior. When is it going to be a happy meeting? When can we all come together and agree that this is the central key, regardless of how we do? This is the central key.
Yeah. And I love that you just boil it down to that question. I think that is why I've gone from disappointment, discouraged, and concerned that we would never get anywhere near a paradigm shift in my lifetime for me to see it, to in the last couple of years, just like so overjoyed that I don't even know how to process it, because of my observations and watching the values start to shift from the very core and mainstream of the industry. But we still have so much of a long way to go. And I think it, you know, we have to recognize in ourselves and in each other, there's a human psychological phenomenon here. If anyone wants to deep dive that, I did. Lord knows I had to process my divorce, so I spent a lot of time in those weeds. James Hollis is a wonderful human psychologist, and he has some great books talking about he's Jungian bias, which I actually really appreciate the Jungian lens about like early, life conditioning and whatnot. But we as humans, as cognitively complex as we are, we experience the threat to our ideology, our belief systems, our values, our self-perceptions, perceptions of others. We experience threats to those things as threats of life, because there's no division in that lens we see life through and ourselves in a way, right? So we just kind of, we experience that as a whole. So when someone says all this training that you've done, this high level training might not be what's best for the dog, it might not be what's best for your clients, it's terrifying. And I know that because I felt it, like I'm not speaking from this place of like, oh no, I've never gotten my ego caught up in client outcomes. Like, of course we do. We all do, and ourselves. And that, we have our dog in public and people around that know what we do for a living. And it's like, they're judging everything our dog is doing. And, I've just had to gradually chip away at my own insecurities personally about that and just be like, I don't care. And frankly, I don't really train my dogs. I explain, and that's a difference now that I am comfortable saying that I wasn't comfortable saying 5 years, 10 years ago, definitely not 15, 20 years ago. I look at it like our job is to be their guide, their literal tour guide, their escort through this set of conditions in this modern pet environment that they frankly don't know how to navigate without our direction.
Yep.
They don't have that biology coming to the table, again, because of the recency of the captivity phenomenon being only in the last 30, 40 years. I mean, it's our lifetime, Victoria. It's like, this has been a change I've watched from childhood where they were loose to now. And I'm not that old. I'm in my mid 40s, so like, this has been a rapid shift. And I think we're also in it. We don't see it. We don't have that perspective of that timeline. But, it's been like, we've been through this roller coaster of like building up the whole idea of dog training, and dog training's everything, and everyone has to train their dogs, and you have to train them to do more, better, faster. And yet there's never been such an epidemic of dog behavior problems in this country as
never.
right now.
And
there's never been more dog trainers.
Exactly. I mean, we can use all the excuses we like of, that the environment and people are busier and they're going out to work, and then the dogs are more isolated and blah, blah, blah. But really, we have to look at our own behavior and how we are existing with these dogs in our home.
Yeah.
Why we got them in the first place. And what you said about, like, I don't really train my dogs. I don't really train my dogs. And I think that, it's weird because they know a few things. Like, I don't even know, like, I talk to them.
Right. I do too.
Yeah. And Jasmine, I was walking her out in the street the other day, and I just say, hey, Jasmine, she was at the end of her lead, and I was just say, hey, Jasmine, come back here. I just need to do something. As in, like, I needed to do something with her harness. And she turns around and comes back to me.
Yeah. Yeah. See, Victoria, what you just touched on right there is something I've brought up a number of times in recent presentations. And it's so poignant. Dogs and humans have been together for 10 to 40,000 years. How long have we had professional dog trainers?
Not long.
1% of that, if.
Yep.
Okay. So why then did it work so well as an evolutionary love story between our species for 10 to 40,000 years? And this is why I love ethology, because ethology answers that question. Social signaling, reading facial expressions, body language, tone of voice, all of the neurological connections. I mean, now we have recent studies to show that literally, we and dogs are synchronizing nervous systems, not to mention the research that's been done recently about trees synchronizing their own systems with our own. Like, we have been taught that we are islands. We believe that other species are islands. They are not. And so you can tap into what is already this system that's been there for 10 to 40,000 years in terms of communication and understanding. And the training piece, yes, it's optional. How dare I say that out loud? It is optional. That's, if you want to teach your dog to do something really specific, you can. But even when I'm teaching, I think of it like I'm explaining training. So I talk to my dogs constantly. I have beautiful relationships with them. I mean, beautiful. And everything is so understated and subtle. I don't really use any commands.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, and
Yeah.
it's so weird to say that out loud doing what I do for a living because of how powerful our current model has gotten in our thinking. And yet again, when we share these things with clients, when we confess them, they are relieved and they love to know. So you're just going to help me solve the practical daily life problems I have. And I don't need to jump through all of these hoops either. Yeah, that's what we're going towards. That's what family dog mediation is about, you know?
So, and I'm glad you also said that if you do want to teach your dog to do something, like you do want to teach your dog to not run out of the door.
Yep.
Sure, you can do that.
Yeah.
Absolutely, you can do that, but you do that as a guide. And I really think that, you know, we don't issue commands, or we shouldn't, maybe some people do. We don't issue one word commands to our kids.
Right.
So, why are we doing that to our dogs? And if they don't speak our language, I understand, but they understand more than we think they do because of that synchronicity and because of just being. And when I was talking to Sarah Fisher as well, and her Facebook Live was a couple of days ago, and we were talking about this idea of really not training, and that it's so much more about that. And she's another person that's just, I think, such a game changer in this industry. And we were talking about this, like this understanding. It's just an understanding. It's sort of an indescribable thing, but it is just an understanding. And when you get rid of that I say you do relationship, if you have it, that you're a guide, you're that teacher that guides. And so the whole concept of training, we've got to get away from.
I mean, I think so. I think we've been taught it's kind of like we had this idea of dominion and then this idea of the animals and the animal kingdom, they're dumb. Do you know the dumb animals and us humans were up here? And we're really starting to have all the scientific evidence to justify our appreciation of the true complexity of all of these other species. Okay. And so let's just drop the superiority complex in my, you know, that's my aim. And to say all those other species, they don't need professionals to modify their behavior. Okay. Now we are in a position because they're captive, they are dependents. So the analogy of a parent, I think, fits very well as a result of that, if nothing else. There's a couple other explanations for why that model, I think, also makes sense to them. But because they're dependents, they can't find out the answers to their questions on their own. They can't strategize their own autonomous choices in life other than what we provide for them, right? So we have to take that responsibility the way that we would as a parent. But your description a moment ago about that difference in relationships, so rather than this power dynamic, which even honestly positive reinforcement is guilty of engaging in, where I have the cookies.
Yeah, and you've got to do something from it.
It's compliance based, you know, as opposed to relationship and communication based. And what you just described is indescribable. Isn't that the thing, right? Isn't that the thing we're all seeking in friendships, in romantic relationships, in relationships with our children, in relationships with other animals, is that indescribable connection of understanding, which the industry has been uncomfortable talking about because we can't quantify it.
Yes.
And I appreciate the value of science because I appreciate what it is trying to combat in the mythology historically that does not apply about pack theory and all of this kind of stuff, which created a lot of problematic and injurious methods and practices. But there's a lot that we can't measure that's still very scientifically valid. And I want us as an industry to get more comfortable with that again, as opposed to show me the recent data.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Let's go back a little bit. And I have Downton Abbey in mind, because Downton Abbey is when you see, and I've forgotten the dog's name, but you see the what's his name, the Earl of Grantham, and he's walking down the stairs of his beautiful stately home, and next to him is this dog, no collar, no lead, nothing, and his dog just kind of, they just hang out together, they just are, and they go off and walk together, and it just is.
Mhm.
And this whole thing of, again, talking to Sarah Fisher, of when I was an actor, and the very first day I went to drama school, and the teacher said, I'm going to teach you how not to act.
Mm.
I'm going to teach you how to react, but
Mm.
you're not coming here to learn how to act, because we don't
Mm.
act here. We just are. And I'm going to teach you that, the Amdram people, the reason why they're not genuine is because they do too much,
Mhm.
right? They do too much. The really good actors are the ones that just are. And the really good actors are the ones that just do less.
Yeah.
And we need to do less. We
Yeah.
need to truly observe and understand our character, and we need to do some. We need to educate ourselves about our character when you're an actor. But when you're actually playing that character, you do less. And I really truly feel like that's now where we're moving to, in that it's okay, you don't have to do so much. And in
Yeah.
fact, by doing less, there's more power, there's more connection, you're believable, you're genuine.
Yeah, 100%. I think, you're tapping into some really important stuff here. It's, how do we feel comparing what feels like a very transactional relationship, right? Versus one where we just feel seen, and we feel, a sense of connection. And, little things like we undervalue as a social species, which we are, which they are, all social species as part of their ethogram and their phenotype seek connection, social stability, and safety. And as a social species, that is dependent on having a competent individual taking care of our group, not dominating our group, taking care of our group, having the group's interest at heart, being responsible, making good decisions, being observant about what's going on in the environment, being sensitive to the relationships of others. Those are successful social groups in nature. And so being something our dog can hang their hat on, bottom line, so undervalued. One of my favorite one-liners is, if you want your dog to listen to you, learn to be someone worth listening to.
Oh my God, I love that. I think that should apply to people too.
I mean, aren't we all that way though? Like, do we ever listen to someone that we don't think they're worth listening to? And yet, does someone worth listening to ever need to ask us to listen?
Yeah, no, they don't.
No, we're hanging on their every word, And so it's like there's all of these beautiful opportunities that are so swept over and dismissed by an industry that's been hyper fixated on an operant model, which is completely valid. It's just not the whole story. And I think we're going to make dogs and people's lives easier if we can say, okay, let's get outside of our comfort zone. Let's rebuild this.
And we are.
Mm-hmm.
Voices
Thanks to
like
people like
yours.
you.
Well,
Yeah.
it is, Rome wasn't built in a day. Maybe that's
Right.
not a great analogy to use, but it does take a village. And
Yeah.
it takes a village of people who are passionate about this stuff. And I truly feel like that this is the way that it needs to go. You can argue all day about shot collars and this and that. You can argue all about it, or you're like, but the dog is
Yeah.
trying to talk to you.
Right. Yeah.
And let's ask the dog. And by and doing that, you have to have that connection, you have to have that trust, you have to have that understanding. And so I think people who might have maybe been like, well, I don't know if I'm going to come to this conference, after listening to you, I think have to come. because I know, and you don't have long to speak. I mean, but I do think that you can also introduce them to legs, and I think that taking your course is extremely valuable. I encourage all my students from VSA to go take your course, as I do with Michael Shikashio. I think it's really important, and because it's going to it takes everybody to a next level where they need to be.
And I feel the same in that I feel that, this is not something that any one person is doing, which I also think breaks a model that we've had in the industry where we get this weird hero worship about certain industry figures. And like, this is
Yeah,
about all of us together standing shoulder to shoulder
it
and
is.
steering the ship. It's going to take all hands on deck to do that. And, that's why this isn't about learn the newest fancy technique fad of the year. This is about like this coming together in this building of a collaborative community and spirit of professionals, which on its own right is just a breath of fresh air in the dog industry, frankly,
Mhm.
in that, being willing to say it's not about prove that you know all the things in the textbook that we've all decided are the important things in the textbook. It's about, what do you think? What's your experience been? What can you contribute to this conversation? What's your niche going to be in this new endeavor, knowing the stakes are so high, so I feel so excited about the embracing of these tough conversations. I don't minimize how hard it is to have them. I really don't. And I myself struggle with them, as we all do, as we're working to integrate something from the past into this new future that we're building. But yeah, I'm so appreciative of people like you who have taken a position to welcome in and challenge, the older models and welcome in a newer model, as we're at the beginning of learning what that looks like. And we don't have all the answers yet. And we're not trying to say that we do. We're saying we need a whole army to figure out what the answer to those questions are.
We do, and I'm excited about the journey.
Me too.
I'm excited about the journey. So, Kim, thank you so much. And I know that as we've been talking, that people have been asking questions, and that I promise I will look at your comments. I will not be able to answer everybody. Kim, feel free if you want to, but believe you me, I appreciate everybody who's commenting. And if you can, it is April the 1st to the 3rd, Dog Behavior Conference. Kim is going to be doing her amazing presentation along with our other wonderful presenters. And yeah, it is truly a time where I think it is a collaborative spirit. Our conference is very collaborative, and I only have presenters that I know are moving that needle, that I know that have very different things to say within, but are moving the needle and are game changers. So we're not all going to sing from the same songbook, but we're getting close.
Yeah.
So thank you so much, Kim. And to all of you, I hope that you have enjoyed this. I hope you have a wonderful day and hope to see you at the conference. Thank you so much.